Imagine, it is 1944. The entire world is burning in the flames of a terrible war. Fighter planes are roaring across the skies, massive warships are clashing with one another at sea, and millions of soldiers on the ground are putting their lives on the line. You are a young soldier in the Japanese army. Your country is going through a difficult time, but you have been taught that a soldier's first duty is to complete his mission. One day, you receive orders to travel to a small but strategically important island in the Philippines. The enemy is watching this place and every step is filled with danger. Before you leave, your commander gives you one final order. If the situation gets worse, if your fellow soldiers retreat, you must continue your mission no matter what. At that moment, you have absolutely no idea that this order is about to turn into the longest wait of your life. Because in just a few years, the war around the world will come to an end. Countries will surrender, soldiers will return home, but one soldier will remain, hiding deep inside the jungle, still believing that the war is going on. This is not the story of a movie. This is a real event, one that shocked the entire world. The name of this soldier was Hiroo Onoda. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922 in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. In his youth, he joined the Japanese army and received military training. During World War II, Japan was fighting with all its strength. In Japanese military culture, surrender was considered a great disgrace, and soldiers were taught to fulfill their duty under all circumstances. In December 1944, Hiroo Onoda was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. He was ordered to use guerrilla warfare tactics, monitor enemy activity, and help defend the island. Lubang was a small but strategically important island. The Japanese military wanted their station there to disrupt American military operations and gather intelligence. When Hiroo Onoda arrived there, he was not just a soldier but a young officer who had been given an extremely difficult responsibility. But he had absolutely no idea that his mission would not last just a few months, but would become one of the longest military waits in history. By the end of 1944, the map of the world was rapidly changing. The Japanese military was already under pressure on multiple fronts. But for Hiroo Onoda and his fellow soldiers stationed on Lubang Island, the war was far from over. Their job was to monitor enemy activity, gather important intelligence, and continue fighting through guerrilla tactics when necessary. But conditions on Lubang were far from easy. The number of Japanese soldiers was limited, and the American forces were steadily advancing. In early 1945, the fighting in the Philippines intensified. The American forces began capturing several key areas, and gradually, the Japanese soldiers started splitting into small groups. Then came the moment that changed the course of the entire world. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After this, Japan announced its surrender on August 15th. On September 2nd, 1945, Japan officially signed the surrender documents. World War II was over. Most of the soldiers around the world began returning home, but the news never reached Hiroo Onoda and his fellow soldiers, hiding in the jungles of Lubang in a way they could trust. After the war ended, the Allies tried to get messages to Japanese soldiers hiding in the jungles. Leaflets were dropped, telling them that the war was over and Japan had lost. But Hiroo Onoda and his fellow soldiers did not believe it. It was difficult for them to accept that the war they had been trained and prepared for had suddenly come to an end. They thought it might be an enemy trick, designed to make them come out of hiding, because one thing had been deeply ingrained in their minds: complete the mission and never surrender without orders. Now they faced their biggest challenge, surviving in the jungles without an army, without any support, and without any contact. They had no idea that the outside world had completely changed. While everyone else was starting a new life after the war, they were still trapped in the same old mission. The jungle had now become their home. Finding food, staying hidden, and keeping themselves safe every day became a part of their lives. But in the years to come, this struggle was going to become even harder, because now they were facing more than just a war. Time itself was about to become their greatest enemy. For the rest of the world, World War II was already over. But deep inside the dense jungles of Lubang Island, Hiroo Onoda's war was still going on. Even after 1945, Onoda did not consider his mission complete. A few other Japanese soldiers were still with him, and they believed, just like he did, that the war was still going on. Life in the jungle had completely changed for them. They no longer had an army, no new orders, and no contact with their homeland. They had to figure out for themselves how to survive in this unfamiliar environment. They lived hidden in the jungle, keeping an eye on activity in the surrounding area, and tried to hide their presence. Time passed, 1 year, then several more years, but Hiroo Onoda's belief never changed. Whenever he received a message saying that the war was over, he suspected that it might be an enemy trick, designed to lure them out of their hiding place. By the 1950s, the world had changed dramatically. Many countries had rebuilt themselves after the war. New technologies were emerging and people were returning to their normal lives. But in the jungles of Lubang, one soldier was still committed to the same mission. Now his biggest challenge was no longer just the enemy. The challenge was hunger, the weather, disease, and loneliness. To survive in the jungle, he had to search for food every day. He relied on the resources available around him and did whatever he could to stay alive. Gradually, the number of soldiers living with him also began to decrease. Some were killed in clashes, while others eventually surrendered. Eventually, Hiroo Onoda was left almost alone in the jungle. Now imagine, if the entire world were telling you that an event was already over, but you believed that your mission was still unfinished, what would you do? For Onoda, this was not just a decision. It was connected to his training, his beliefs, and the order he had accepted as his life's duty. By the 1960s, the 1970s, the world had reached outer space. Humans had already walked on the moon. New generations had grown up. But in a jungle in the Philippines, Hiroo Onoda was still carrying out the same mission that had been given to him nearly 3 decades earlier. Nearly 29 years had passed. In all that time, the world had completely changed. But for Hiroo Onoda, the war was still not over. Then, in 1974, an event took place that would change his life. A young Japanese man, Norio Suzuki, traveled to Lubang Island to find him. His goal was to find the soldier who had left the entire world astonished. Finally, in the middle of the jungle, Norio Suzuki found Hiroo Onoda. But Onoda was still not ready to surrender, because for him, only one person could make the final decision: his former commanding officer. Now, there was only one question left. Would his former commander return? Will the 29-year-old mission finally come to an end? By 1974, Hiroo Onoda had spent nearly 29 years living in the jungle. The world had completely changed. The war he had continued fighting, believing it was his final battle, had ended decades earlier. But for Onoda, his mission was still unfinished. When the young Japanese man, Norio Suzuki, finally found him, he told him that the war was over and that the world had changed. But Hiroo Onoda refused to surrender. Because one thing mattered most to him: he needed an official order from his former commanding officer. He believed that until that officer ordered him to end his mission, he could not abandon his duty. After that, the Japanese government located his former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Major Taniguchi was no longer in the military at that time. He was working at a bookstore. But in 1974, he was brought to Lubang Island so that he could give his former soldier the final order. On March 9, 1974, Major Taniguchi officially ordered Hiroo Onoda that his mission was over and that he should surrender his weapons. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Hiroo Onoda accepted that the war was truly over. On March 10, 1974, he handed over his rifle and military equipment. He was 52 years old at the time. When he finally emerged from the jungle, the entire world was amazed at how a soldier had managed to survive such harsh conditions for so many years. After returning to Japan, he was welcomed almost like a historic figure. Some people praised his discipline and determination, while others raised questions about the events that took place during the war. But there was no doubt that Hiroo Onoda's story had become one of the most extraordinary episodes in history. He had spent nearly 29 years of his life believing that his mission was still unfinished. His story shows us that wars are not fought only on battlefields. Sometimes, even after a war ends, its effects can remain with a person for many years, shaping their thoughts and their life. Hiroo Onoda's story will always be remembered in history as the story of a soldier who considered his orders the greatest duty of his life and returned home nearly 3 decades later. If you enjoy true and untold historical stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we'll keep bringing you more fascinating stories about history and the struggles of humanity.